Well, hey, welcome to the Light Reading Podcast / SCTE Cable-Tec Expo 2022 wrap-up. That's the official name of what we're doing. Again, I'm Jeff Baumgartner with Light Reading.
I'm Jaimie Lenderman with Omdia.
I'm Nicole Ferraro with Light Reading.
So we've been in here in Philadelphia for a couple days.
Feels like years.
Feels like years, yeah. We've been here for a while.
Humidity,
But
man.
yeah, yeah. But we wanted to kind of recap a little bit what we've seen and heard at the show. Right, we had the opening general session, been around covering sessions, talking with people. I thought the first thing was just, hey, what's as you kind of think about everything you've seen and heard so far, what's the big takeaway for you at this show?
Well, it's my first time at the show, so I don't mind chiming in first. I was at the general session yesterday with the CEOs of Liberty Global and Comcast or Charter.
Comcast.
It was Charter yesterday or Comcast?
Yeah, it was Comcast.
So I was at the general session yesterday with the CEOs of Comcast and Liberty Global. Sorry. And they had a thorough discussion. I wrote about some takeaways. But one thing that I thought was notable that the CEO of Liberty Global was saying is that cable has sort of had this magical moment during the pandemic because all of the ISPs had to keep America connected, mandated, pledged through the government. But he was talking about how, cable companies haven't necessarily had the greatest reputation, but they should bottle the magic of what they've established with their customers and with regulators and stuff. And I thought it was an interesting perspective because certainly, a lot of work was done to keep people connected through the pandemic, but a lot of work was not done. And there are a lot of communities that were kept disconnected by their cable providers. And on the other side of that, you see even now, there are cable operators who are meddling in the rules and regulations around grant funding and challenging grants from these smaller ISPs. So I think that's a sort of delicate balance.
So the yin and yang of the industry.
Yeah,
We're getting a little more yin than yang in this case.
It might take a little more than, the pandemic PR moment to really reestablish their reputation with customers if that is their overall goal, which...
Right. They're like, hey, we kept up with the surge in most cases, but there's more work to do. Yeah, they're not done.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So that was one takeaway for me.
Okay. How for you?
For me, I had the opportunity to moderate the Light Reading breakfast yesterday on transforming the HFC network, and we talked to vendors and operators were there, and then a lot of conversation on the show floor. And my big takeaway from a technology standpoint is, yes, DOCSIS 4.0 is coming, and but there's still a lot of runway for DOCSIS 3.1. There's still a lot of things that can be done in the plant for the longevity of that, and then of course, PON is an okay word to use this year. Like we're using it.
And fiber too.
And fiber too.
Right, and along with PON together. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So it's been really interesting to see that there's a multi-level approach, multi-technology approach to how operators are confronting, not just remaining competitive, but remaining, market leaders.
Right. Yeah, I think we're kind of getting into this era with the industry where there's a lot more discussion about convergence of the network, convergence of services, because to your point, we're not at that like it was years ago where it's like, well, everyone's really going to shift and do DOCSIS 3.0, or we're all going to do 3.1. There's a lot of fiber being put in. They're doing mobile and wireless. But you're right, not everybody is going to take the 4.0 path, I think. They're going to try to squeeze as much out of 3.1 as they can.
Right, or even just a targeted approach. There's some that have plans to use DOCSIS 4.0 in targeted areas, DOCSIS 3.1, and then fiber in high competitive areas.
Right. But the other message, that kind of came through was at least the ones that are kind of on the 4.0 train, right. Comcast and Charter, they were pretty upfront out this week about what kind of advances they've made with 4.0 and with Comcast with the FDX amplifier tests that they announced, and then Charter just saw they were doing like an N+6 version of 4.0. But the whole idea is for them to say, well, look, we're ready to, when we're ready to go, we can do this across, the bulk of our network versus little pockets here and there. And then the other thing, I don't know, there was a lot of talk about the 10G initiative, and even though like speeds and feeds are like, you can kind of put a big round number on something, maybe it's, kind of the PR part of it, but they did want to talk a lot about reliability and other aspects that kind of go beyond just speed. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, the other thing they were talking about at the general session, I thought this was also an interesting balance, was, cable networks are going to be necessary for everything that we're going toward in the future, the higher bandwidth needs, the metaverse, metaverse, all of that. But at the same time, they're having this sort of panicked moment, like this rush to upgrade their networks because you have all these other providers who are rapidly deploying full fiber in their spaces. So it's sort of like a feeling of like, we are the future and we may not be the future. We may not make it to the end.
Yeah, it feels like they're starting to move a little bit faster than they were, previously. I don't know what you're hearing from your folks, but it just feels like things have kind of ratcheted up a little bit.
They definitely have, and then especially in North America, the government funding is ramping that up as well, making the business case work for those last miles that are been the hardest to connect. And then there was one thing that I remembered during the show. It was pre-pandemic, and I remembered it for this show, is that they asked what keeps you up at night, is what was asked to a panel of engineers, and it was something on the upstream. If all of a sudden everybody needed upstream. And then I believe it was about a year after that is when we found out everybody needed on the upstream. And I think the cable operators did a really good job getting that capacity out and heightening that capacity. But there's this long-term question of, do you need does a subscriber need symmetrical bandwidth, or do they need the upstream to just be enough to where it's reliable?
Yeah, and I think there's like the marketing piece in that, because I think the telcos have been going after them with, hey, we're doing symmetrical gig or symmetrical multi-gig. They're not yet, even though the average consumer doesn't need it. But I think, to your point, I think the cable industry is like, well, we got to make sure we do have more upstream than we have, because it's always been kind of the weak link, in the HFC story.
Yeah, and I think they're also thinking beyond the consumer, beyond residential broadband. I mean, residential broadband numbers have gone down, right, for cable companies?
Yeah, for some they've been flat, but they've been going down. But yeah, the whole like pull forward through the pandemic, you're right. Yeah, they're kind of under pressure to like, what do we do now?
Right, so those, that symmetrical might come in handy if we're actually moving toward a VR metaverse, or even like industrial metaverse. For example, I went to a Nokia event recently, and if they're focused on the metaverse, their focus is on industrial and plugging telcos into that opportunity. So I think we've gotten we're not through the pandemic, but we've gotten through the major pandemic moment of people needing all of that capacity. So I think the cable companies are seeing both encroachment on their space, the overbuilding through all of that funding, and also, how do we build for the actual future, if there is one.
We hope there is, but
I don't know.
I don't know about you. We'll see. But
I hope so.
I'm indifferent.
yeah. Yeah, and then the last thing we just talk about, like, it kind of ties into the beyond the speeds. It's just like the consumer experience is another thing that we're talking about. And now it's like, well, the network, the consumer now expects the network to be up all the time, because a lot of us are still working from home. A lot of people are. They're still schooling from home, and not just focus so much on that speed story. But again, they're trying to create this well-rounded view, of what they're trying to do. And, I think there's some reality and some perception, that they got to kind of work through.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
And I think, with regards to quality of experience, it's that whole home connectivity. Mom just wants her tablet to work. She, and 80% of calls into 8% of the calls in the call centers are about Wi-Fi.
Right.
And that's going to continue to be a problem for any operator, and they need to get out in front of that to support that quality of experience, or it's going to affect their churn.
Okay. And I guess the last thing, if we're coming to the show next year, what do you think is going to be the big story? Is it going to be just a continuation of where we are today, or is there going to be something else that's going to be the big focus?
I feel like the overarching theme was sort of meet in the middle. Like we're all meeting in the middle at the show. In our from a technology standpoint for solutions, and I think maybe we'll see some more of the same. We're figuring out what works, and choose your own adventure. I'm wondering if that's what we'll be doing next year too.
Well, next year I hope that the conference leaders integrate the venue with Google Maps, because I've spent 50% of my time just lost walking around.
It is a labyrinth in this convention center.
I definitely did better today, but yesterday was a nightmare. But I think next year we might hear more about the metaverse, because that brings the opportunity to talk more about 10G and all of these more hyped technologies. I think also maybe we'll hear a little bit more about these like overbuilder, smaller competitors. I think they were treading kind of lightly around those subjects, at least from the sessions that I sat in on, acknowledging that that's a present danger, quote unquote, to their futures, but not necessarily talking about how to go at it from a policy angle, or really being public about their strategies for that. So I wonder if we'll hear more about that as some of that funding starts to flow and more grants start to be handed out.
Okay. Well, I think we'll just hear more about the kind of the 10G story. I think the DOCSIS 4.0 part of it will obviously solidify a little more by next year. And if I had to make a prediction, I think by next year, I don't know if I think Comcast definitely will not be like the only FDX adopter in the industry. I'm not going to predict who is going to jump on, but I think that they're not going to be the only one. So we'll check that in a year.
Yeah, it'll be good to come back and see, what's happened between, the announcement and next year.
Okay. Well, that'll be a wrap from Cable-Tec Expo. It was great to be in person and see everybody.
It was so great. I loved it.
Yeah, I know Nicole had a lovely time.
Yes.
And Jaimie had a good time, I think.
I had a good time,
yeah.
Yep.
And me too, but I think we're going to, make sure we're good.
Yeah.
We'll pass this around after we're done.
And then we'll
Get your
sanitize the
boosters.
sanitizer.
Yeah. We'll make sure we keep everything clean. All right.